Good evening, good evening. If you're watching this in the evening, I think it's worth talking about where vaccines and the current rollout fits into the overall problems that we have ahead and the plans that we have ahead. Now, clearly in this country, we are doing well on the vaccine rollout, but what is the purpose of the vaccine rollout? What's the purpose of vaccines? Firstly, it's to prevent more deaths. Secondly, it's to be able to get back to a fully functional economy as quickly as possible. And there's a third one as well, which is to lessen the morbidity. And that is when you carry long-term symptoms and problems from the disease. And if you're thinking about the NHS and burden on the NHS, that's also there as well as part of the sort of economic and social functioning sort of considerations. And then the effects of lockdown also impact upon mortality and morbidity too. But the main three things that will be judged on at the end of all of this is how many deaths we've had, how much economic damage there has been, and how much long-term health and well-being damage there is as well. So clearly, vaccinations are one of the tools in order to address this. Other tools include an efficient and effective test and trace system, a compliant population that does self-isolate when they know they have it or suspect they have it and are supported to do so. And also security at borders, testing at borders for the virus or automatically quarantining at borders for the virus. This is all a set of tools together by which you make sure that you minimize deaths, minimize economic disruption, and minimize ongoing morbidity burden that you have upon your population. Now, there are countries like New Zealand and Australia that haven't started their vaccine rollout yet. And they don't really need to, because they've largely got things under control at this stage through effective test and trace, high compliance from the population, and security at borders. So they pursued this zero COVID strategy from fairly early on, and they've done well for it, similarly with lots of other Asian countries. So we're in a different situation where we're very dependent now on vaccinations in order to get on top of this, but we can't let drop the other strands here. And so the big danger is with this country, and maybe some other like European countries or the US, where there's high, or Brazil and other South American countries, is when you've got a high infection rate in the population still, and you're dealing with it with vaccines, and then there's this massive pressure because you've had so many lockdowns, boom and bust of lockdown, and you're trying to deal with it. You then say, well, when we've got the over 70s covered, then we can start opening up, or when we've got the over 50s covered, then we can start opening up, because that is a stage at which you have largely tackled the bulk of the threats with deaths, and you're thinking about minimizing the risk to the economy. However, there's a third risk which can slip through the middle, and that is the morbidity, specifically in the form of long COVID. Because if you do get coronavirus, you do have a chance of having long COVID, which can mess you up long term. And the ONS currently have limited statistics on it, but they say 1 in 5 will have symptoms beyond 5 weeks, and 1 in 10 will have symptoms and ongoing problems beyond 12 weeks. However, we know that from the first wave, there are many people still suffering from long COVID after picking up coronavirus in March. So they've had it coming up to a year now, and there hasn't been adequate data recording by the government on this, and we need to address it quickly, because given that there are people saying we need to open the economy as quickly as possible, it's fine if it transmits around the youth. A very low proportion of them will go into hospital or die. Yeah, sure. But nevertheless, they could pick up this debilitating condition from coronavirus. And at the moment, you would estimate there would be 200, 300, 400,000 people actually living with long COVID at the moment. You do not want to exacerbate that with a third wave, because also, economically speaking, that would really hammer the productivity of your working population going forward, let alone the distress and the health burdens that it causes on your population. So we have to be really, really clever there. And before you can do the trade-offs and the balances between when and where you open your economy, you do actually need good and accurate data on what the risks are with long COVID. How long does it last? What proportion have it last beyond 6 months? How debilitating is it for people going back to work? Because if you're not factoring that in, then you really run the risk of building up that massive health burden going forward. And this brings me on to the next thing, and I probably just want to wind up with this, is that beyond the vaccination and then beyond the reopening of the economy and all of that kind of stuff, we do have a long recovery plan that needs to be put into place. And the major political parties and our health experts should be thinking about that now. And that needs to be a lot more multi-dimensional than just what's been coming out of SAGE and other modelers with, number of people that are projected to go into hospital or die. You really have to map out the burden of long COVID. There's the social impacts on people's mental health or family and schooling. You really do need new models that are multi-dimensional on all those impacts, so that you can have not only the economic recovery, but also the health recovery needed for lots of individuals who are going to be struggling in lots of different ways. So that's all that I wanted to leave you with tonight, because of course this government is banging on only about vaccination rate at the moment, and we've seen so much waste on the test and trace system, and it's really alarming that Dido Harding was saying that no one expected the mutations to come along. I mean, we've got a lot of complex problems still to deal with, and there's more than one tool that is needed going forward. And at the end of the day, the UK is actually doing pretty damn badly on those three measures. And what I worry about is that this third one, that this aspect of morbidity, is not even being properly considered yet. So I just wanted to flag that up and make you all aware of that, because I think the more that we collectively highlight this, the better. And to give an example, Nick Triggle, the health correspondent of the BBC, wrote up an interview with Matt Hancock about how we get out of the coronavirus crisis, in which there was not a single mention of long COVID, as they were talking about how to build out of this and what the things we need to be mindful of as we reopen the economy. And I wrote, I tweeted at Nick Triggle and said, you were writing about this, but in your analysis, you didn't make a single mention of it. And he goes like, yeah, he writes back saying, oh yeah, well, that's because we've got insufficient data on it. And I said, yeah, I know. And that's why we're asking for more data, because while there's insufficient data, journalists aren't highlighting that it's an issue. But if journalists start highlighting that it's an issue, then that forces the government to recognize that it's an issue and start collecting adequate data on it. So there really is a vicious cycle there of irresponsibility in flagging up something which is a growing problem. And then, like I said, beyond that, there are lots of other knock-on things that we should be measuring in order to take care of people's health. And I'll stop it there. Maybe I'll have a look at some of the few comments on the side. Yes, I'm still in the sauna, and I've got a green screen up here to stop all your jokes on that matter. Sonia says, surely, I can show these. Surely preventing, perhaps people don't want their kind of like faces up, so maybe I won't do that and just read them out. Hide that too. Surely preventing further seeding of current and future variants can only be achieved by total border controls. strict border controls, yes, and decent mapping in all of the countries about the variants that are there. So real use of genomic capacity, both in the UK, but also in partner countries that we want to be able to open travel with, about what the risks are there. We need to map that really, really thoroughly. And of course, once we're done vaccinating ourselves, we have glutted ourselves on vaccinations. We've ordered about 5.5 doses of vaccines per person in this country. The EU is on about 4 vaccines per person. Canada is on 9 doses, or 9 full vaccinations, sorry, per person. So all of the Western world that have filled themselves up on this are going to have to help get into Africa and South America and maybe India, and help out in making sure that we thoroughly vaccinate as far as we can, even going into rural areas, in order to get coronavirus right down so that we don't have nasty variants coming back to bite us. So at the end of the day, I mean, we could be crowing a lot about our own vaccination rate, but we're not going to be able to open up our business and our tourism and travel with the rest of Europe until all of Europe is safe. And then we won't be able to open up further afield until those countries are safe. And all the time we need sophisticated monitoring about what are all the different threats coming out of all the different countries. And it does worry me that we are doing, with the single dose vaccinations with AstraZeneca are fine. Because that's been proven to be fine. It hasn't been proven to be fine with the Pfizer one yet, and we're still doing it at the 12-week rate. And if it's not fine, then it's a dangerous thing to be doing, to have people half protected in a country where you've also got the virus running rampant. You're kind of inviting that to be a breeding ground for new vaccine-resistant strains. Do you think the current vaccines will be able to be used successfully against new variants that come further down the line? I think so. One of the heartening things for me is that we all, as you know, countries in the Western world, bought up lots of different vaccines, sort of pre-booked them, a whole portfolio of them, hoping that 1 or 2 would come through and that would be sufficient. Whereas they all seem to be coming through with really, really good results. And basically, the fundamentals of how they work can be adapted to keep up with variants when we see variants come along. So the fact that, I mean, okay, the South African one is a bit more resistant and a bit more difficult, but I think I'm quite confident that we've got a lot of firepower in the in the pharma sector to actually deal with new things as we identify them. But we're going to have to make sure that we, you know, keep brakes on at the borders and things like that in order to make sure that we can catch up with it. Samantha Gadros, they had, I don't know, a zero COVID policy from the start. It's too late for the UK now. It's gone AWOL, virtually no, yeah. So we didn't have a zero COVID strategy from the start. Would that have worked if we had, given that we're international, you know, hub of activity and all the rest? Yeah, probably. I mean, in Scotland, they got it down to, you know, a long period of kind of like no deaths and very few hospitalizations over the summer. And it was only the import of more coronavirus through travel that blew that. You know, it's more demanding for some parts of the UK, especially London, but there really were no border checks over the summer when all of Europe was actually very, very low. I mean, America was doing badly at the time, but across Europe, you know, each and every one of the European countries, to be blunt, had a much better bet at, you know, keeping it out for the autumn and getting to that state. So there's lots of... right. My younger daughter had COVID early March last year, has now had the mutation this month. My 11-year-old granddaughter has been diagnosed with COVID toe, as has her dad, who has 4 painful COVID toes. I haven't heard of COVID toes before. This means they've been asymptomatic and may well now suffer from long COVID. That all without considering the RSA and Brazilian mutations, and now MPs are pushing for lockdown to end. Are they for real? I think this is a very important point, that a lot of people that have long COVID never went to hospital. When they got long COVID during the first wave, we know this population well. They never went to hospital. They got it, but then it never went away, and it stuck around, giving them brain fog, painful heart palpitations, diarrhea. Sometimes people even going onto a stick or on wheelchairs. This isn't your regular post-viral fatigue, people, which can be brutal in some cases, but this is really something that we need to deal with. So the notion that you're only going to be debilitated if you've, gone to hospital and just survived it is not the case. So my worry is that even with the vaccines, if people still, contract it, or even with the youth when people contract it, even if it doesn't seem very strong in the beginning, there's a chance that that coronavirus could throw a hand grenade into one of your critical organs and bugger it up long term, and that's what we're looking at, and it isn't fully understood yet. So this is the reason why it just makes sense to be careful about getting the numbers down and then keeping them down. How do you feel about the talk of opening schools in March? Is it too soon? This is a tricky one. And I mean, the problem with schools is that kids do spread it. I mean, when you've got low transmission in the population as a whole, then you don't get a lot of schools spreading it. But when it's really high, then suddenly there's a bit of a tipping point for schools, and they really become little spreading environments. And because kids are more likely to spread it asymptomatically, then this has really buggered up a lot of the studies to date on the spread of coronavirus, because they can get them into households, and then the patient zero in the household is going to be one of the adults, because they'll be the first ones to show symptoms. So we've heard evidence on this at the all-party parliamentary group on coronavirus, and that was like one of those ooh moments where you realize, just how dangerous that is. But on the flip side, as you well know, especially in deprived communities, that education drag, that lag, is getting big, it's getting dangerous, and if you don't have adequate homeschooling resources for those kids, then that's a really worrying as well. So, I mean, the thing that the government needs to do here is it needs to show all of its workings as it puts it on the paper. It needs to show what the risks are to the spread, in what kind of households, multi-generational households, and it also needs to show what the risk is to impoverished kids, and we need to put numbers on this. And so you essentially do need schools to have a better setup, both in the school that can absolutely minimize, but then also with how they work with kids at home. And so instead of bashing teachers who are rightly concerned, it just takes a whole load of resources in order to make sure that you have tailor-made solutions for each and every community that you're dealing with. That's really the mature way to handle it. Right. Pfizer is better than AstraZeneca, both in terms of efficacy in general as well as efficacy against the variants. Yes, but the one thing that we don't know about Pfizer is how long is an acceptable gap between doses. AstraZeneca have published information on that with sort of a sliding scale of it. We don't have that from Pfizer, but nevertheless, this government is treating them the same, which comes with risks. And I will, Christ, it's midnight. I will answer about one more question, and then I think that will do it. Do we see long COVID in New Zealand? Don't know. I have COVID toe, blistering rash, hair loss, amongst other things. Okay, This COVID toe stuff is interesting. I wasn't aware of that. I will go and look it up. Right. COVID toes have been around for a while. Okay, right. Right, lots of people writing about the toes thing. Okay, I will go and look up the toes thing, seeing as it seems to be quite the topic of conversation in this thread, and I wasn't aware of it. Okay, oops, on point of Pfizer, I had that one and it concerns me. I'm waiting 12 weeks for my follow-up jab. Okay, yeah, I'll just end on that. I think collectively we need answers from the government as to why they are taking so long, in particular with the Pfizer vaccine, in order to provide the second jab. In lots of other countries, they're sticking to the, across Europe, they're sticking to the Pfizer recommended schedule, and Pfizer have not said otherwise. So I think that this issue of the Pfizer one is actually key to crack. I mean, the government either need to start rolling out those second doses of the Pfizer vaccine, or they need to explain why they think that it also can go for such a long period, and they've actually done neither. So that's one. I mean, if that's one to write to your MP about, I would say. Okay, I'm wrapping up there. I'm going to go and get some sleep. I deserve some. Catch you all soon, and take care. And